Chapter 41:35. It's impossible for Mo Yunjue and his companions' battle powers to be so powerful. They could actually kill all four of them. Qian Feilong's eyes flashed with disbelief. This doesn't make sense at all. They already knew that Mo Yunjue and his companions' powers were rather powerful, so they did not dare to overlook them and had sent out an even more powerful team to kill them. Who would have thought that they would all die at the hands of Mo Yunjue and his companion? This was far too terrifying. But, aside from this explanation, we can't find any other explanation. Muze slowly said. Even though he did not want to believe everything that had happened before his eyes, it was all true. Even if they did not want to believe it, it was useless. Bailey Hongzhuang. Li Buyo's eyes flashed with a furious light. He had never expected that they would pay such a heavy price this time. Qian Feilong and the others' eyes flashed with a vicious light. These were all their brothers, and they had always fought side by side. However, they had now died at the hands of those from Penglai Palace. This was simply too abominable. Damn it, we must kill Bailey Hongzhuang and avenge everyone. Everyone nodded. If they had previously thought that Bailey Hongzhuang and her companions did not hold much of a grudge against them, they no longer thought that way. Now, there was a great hatred between them. Their team had almost been disbanded because of the cultivators from Penglai Palace. Who could accept this situation? After making such a decision, they buried their fallen brothers before returning to the ruins. They believed that Bailey Hongzhuang would never have been the first to leave, so she must still be in the ruins. However, they had overlooked her and failed to find her. Initially, they had wanted to chase after Ren Zimei and the others. However, so much time had passed, and they did not know where they had escaped to. This training ground was not small. If they did not know the direction in which they had escaped, it would be very difficult to find them. If Bailey Hongzhuang were to escape because of this, that would be the worst thing that could happen. Therefore, they decided to guard the ruins. Even if they couldn't wait until Bailey Hongzhuang came out, they could wait until Bewitching came out. As long as someone appeared, that would be enough. When Xiren and the others had been hurrying along, not daring to stop for even a moment, none of them knew if the other party would catch up to them. Even though they were all heavily injured, they could only grit their teeth and leave under such circumstances. On one hand, they were worried about their own safety. On the other hand, they wanted to go back and find help as soon as possible. As long as they had help, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen would not be in danger. When Xiren carried Rin Ziheng on his back, while Ao Lingxiao carried Chu Jinfeng on his back. Originally, the two of them were in a terrible state. However, after taking the pills, they discovered that although their complexions were still not good, they did not show any signs of dying. Just this discovery alone was enough to make Ren Zimei go wild with joy. Her greatest wish now was for Ren Ziheng and Chu Jinfeng to survive. Other than that, she had no other wishes in her life. Chapter 41:36. Bailey Hongzhuang was fully immersed in studying the restriction. She had a certain amount of research on formations, but this kind of formation was very complicated and it was extremely difficult to break it. Fortunately, it was still early. She believed that Beichen still needed some time to accept the inheritance, so she was not in a hurry. No matter what, this was a new challenge for her. Xiren and the others rushed back to Penglai Palace. However, the place where they were before was the center of the training ground, so it was not possible to rush back in a short time. Moreover, the skeleton army would appear at any time during the night, so everyone had to be very careful. In their current state, if they encountered the skeleton army, it would be really terrible. Mo Yunjue, Ren Ziheng, and Chu Jinfeng's injuries were very serious. Originally, in such a situation, they needed to recuperate, but there was no chance for them to recuperate because of their blindness. Therefore, in such a situation, it was already very good that the three of them could ensure that their injuries did not become serious. It was impossible for them to recover. Damn it, why is this training ground so big? When we came here, we didn't think it would take so long. Shangguan Yingying frowned. Her face was full of depression. At that time, we were in our best condition, so our speed was naturally faster. Now that everyone is injured, of course, we can't be fast. Xiren sighed. Facing such a situation, he was also very helpless. If there was a way, he also hoped to be able to return as soon as possible. Don't be impatient. It's useless to be anxious now. As long as we can return safely, it's already very good. A.O. Lingxiao's expression was also full of helplessness. In his heart, he was praying that Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beiqian would be fine. On one hand, it was because of the friendship between them. On the other hand, it was also because he pinned all his hopes of taking back his family on Di Beiqian. If something happened to Di Beiqian and Bailey Hongzhuang, then his hope would naturally be impossible. Although this was only a prophecy, and many people would find it ridiculous if he said it out loud, he still believed in this prophecy. He believed that there would be a day when he would take back his family. After a lot of hard work, Xiren and the others finally arrived at the location of the teleportation array. When everyone saw the teleportation array, they couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. They could finally go back. When Xiren and the others had already decided that the first thing they would do when they returned was to look for Master Long. With how much Master Long valued Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beiqian, he would definitely think of a way to support them as soon as he found out about this matter. Moreover, Master Long and the others were relatively stronger, so they were naturally the fastest to rush over. Just the fact that Di Beiqian was able to obtain the inheritance of the Dark Force meant that his value was extraordinary. Since knowing that Di Beiqian had participated in the training, Di Yujue had been paying attention to the movements in Penglai Palace. He had been waiting to meet Di Beiqian for too many years. Now that Di Beiqian was not far from him, he was naturally looking forward to it. When he learned that this training was over, he immediately rushed to Penglai Palace to find Di Beiqian. However, he did not expect to be told that Di Beiqian had not returned yet. Chapter 41:37. Although he also had some complicated views on the inheritance of the Dark Power, he also understood that the power itself did not have any attributes. What happened back then made them have to admit that the Dark Power was extremely powerful. If he could obtain the inheritance of the Dark Power, Di Beiqian's future would be limitless. He also admired Di Beiqian more in his heart. There were many outstanding cultivators in the three major forces, but Di Beiqian was able to stand out from so many cultivators and obtain the inheritance of the ruins. His ability was not simple. Now he was only waiting for Di Beiqian to return. When he thought of the scene of them reuniting, he could not help but feel a little excited. After when Xiren and the others arrived at Penglai Palace, the cultivators in the palace looked at their seriously injured appearance with surprise in their eyes. When senior brother Wanyan came back, didn't he say that Di Beiqian obtained the inheritance of the Dark Power? And when Xiren and the others did not suffer any harm? Why are they like this when they come back now? A cultivator looked at when Xiren and the others in a daze. They looked like they were seriously injured. Could it be that something happened after senior brother Wanyan and the others came back? I don't know. Senior brother Wanyan said it himself. It should be impossible for there to be any changes. Now only they have come back. Di Beiqian and Bailey Hongzhuang have not come back yet. Looking at the situation, I am afraid that something terrible has happened. Faced with everyone's guesses, Xiren and the others did not care about anything else. They rushed to Long Yanwei's residence immediately. When they arrived at Long Yanwei's residence, fortunately, Long Yanwei was also there. Looking at Mo Yunjue and the others who were seriously injured in front of him, Long Yanwei suddenly turned pale with fright. What happened to you? Who hurt you? Ever since he learned that Di Beiqian had obtained the legacy of darkness, he had been waiting here at ease. In particular, he had completely relaxed after learning about the situation of Di Beiqian's group from Wanyan Ling. He did not expect Di Beiqian to be so powerful. All the cultivators from the three major forces had gone, but they, the newcomers, were able to obtain the inheritance. This time, it really shocked everyone. However, according to what Wanyan Ling said, Di Beiqian and the others should be very safe. However, Judging from the miserable state of Xiren and the others, it was obvious that they had gone through an earth-shattering battle and had only managed to survive after expending a tremendous amount of effort. "They are cultivators from the Crimson Moon sect," when Xiren said in a deep voice. The expression in Long Yanwei's eyes changed a little when he heard this. However, he did not immediately inquire about this matter in detail. Instead, he looked towards the injured Mo Yunjue and the rest. "Judging by the situation, your injuries are very serious. You should quickly go and rest." Long Yanwei's face was filled with concern. He then turned to look at Xiren. "When Xiren, if your condition is good, you can stay here and explain this matter to me in detail." After speaking, Long Yanwei quickly called for people to send Mo Yunjue and the others back to their residence. He also ordered people to find a doctor and an alchemist to treat them. In the end, only Xiren and Shangguan Yingying remained. Chapter 4138. We were attacked by the Crimson Moon sect cultivators. When Xiren's expression was gloomy, the cultivators in their group are more powerful and they have more people than us. We are at a complete disadvantage. Previously, when they came out to kill us, we used all our skills and finally managed to escape. However, everyone was injured. Rin Ziheng and Chu Jinfeng almost lost their lives. Until now, we don't know if they will survive. Hearing Xiren's words, Izihua could not help but frown. "Are the Crimson Moon sect cultivators you're talking about Li Boyo and the rest?" Shangguan Yingying nodded. "That's right, it's them. I heard from Wan Yinling that they came back with ease after seeing Li Boyo and the rest leave." "Could it be that they came back again?" "Yes, they suddenly came back after leaving for a day. None of us expected this." After receiving Xiren's confirmation, Long Yanwei and Izihua's expressions turned ugly. They never thought that Li Boyo would do such a thing. It was obvious that he had done it on purpose to deceive Wan Yinling and the rest. As such, as long as Wan Yinling and the rest left, Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest would not be a match for them. This Li Boyo is really despicable. Izihua's eyes darkened. His Dantian has been destroyed, but he still managed to stir up so much trouble. How despicable. Bang! Long Yanwei slammed the table, and his face was filled with rage. Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest were the young people in the Penglai Palace who were currently in the limelight. According to their judgment, they would replace Wan Yinling and the rest in the future. Now, Li Boyo wanted to kill Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest in one fell swoop. This was too despicable. "Lord Long, this is not the most important thing now. You should go and help Hongzhuang and Beichen." Shangguan Yingying hurriedly said, "They're still in the ruins. According to our judgment, Li Boyo and the others will definitely not give up. Maybe they will stay near the ruins and wait for Beichen and Hongzhuang to come out. After all, they have the advantage in numbers. Once they meet, Beichen and Hongzhuang will be in danger." The moment these words were spoken, Long Yanwei and Izihua's expressions changed once again. "According to you, Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang have already encountered them?" Xiren shook his head. "We can't be sure about that. We don't know when Hongzhuang and Beichen will come out of the ruins, but the only thing we can be sure of is that Li Boyo and the others will not let them go. Send someone to help immediately," Long Yanwei said to Izihua without hesitation. "If you encounter any cultivators from the Crimson Moon sect, kill them without mercy." Izihua nodded when he saw the determination and ruthlessness in Long Yanwei's eyes. "Don't worry, I'll make the arrangements immediately. No matter what, we can't let anything happen to Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen." Long Yanwei's heart sank. On one hand, Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang were cultivators that he had high hopes for. He had always treated them as his most valued disciples. Now that they were in danger and had been schemed against by the cultivators from the Crimson Moon sect, how could he not help them immediately? Chapter 4139. Izihua was naturally aware of this. With Di Beichen's current status, he was practically the crown prince of Penglai Palace. Anyone could have an accident, but Di Beichen absolutely could not have an accident. If anything were to happen to him, even the Crimson Moon sect leader would want nothing more than to personally kill the few fellows from his sect, let alone them. The consequences of angering the D family was not something they could bear. Yanwei, in my opinion, we should inform the Golden Flame auction house about this matter, Izihua said. Du Jue had been waiting for Di Beichen's return. They had promised Du Jue that they would inform Di Beichen as soon as he returned. Although the current situation was completely different from what they had expected, they had to give Du Jue an explanation no matter what. At the very least, they had to let him know about this matter. Long Yanwei nodded his head when he heard this. They definitely could not hide this news. When Ziren and Shangwan Yingying heard that Izihua was going to inform the Golden Flame auction house about this matter, they could not help but feel puzzled. They did not know what this matter had to do with the Golden Flame auction house. However, just as they were about to ask, the sound of footsteps was suddenly heard from outside the house. Immediately after, an outstanding figure appeared in their line of sight. Seeing this figure, Ziren and Shangwan Yingying could not help but be stunned. This was because they were no stranger to this figure. They had seen him before, but they did not expect to see him again here. However, after the other party arrived, he did not pay attention to them. Instead, he spoke directly to Long Yanwei. Long Yanwei, I heard that Beichen's situation is not good. Du Jue's gaze was deep, and there was a haze in the depths of his eyes. When he heard the news, he immediately rushed over. Originally, he had been waiting for Di Beichen's good news. He did not expect to hear such bad news in the end. Naturally, he was in a terrible mood. Seeing that Du Jue had actually come directly, Long Yanwei and Izihua could not help but feel surprised. However, after thinking about it for a while, they understood. With Du Jue's methods, he must have already planted spies in the Penglai Palace. Ziren and the others' return had attracted so much attention. Naturally, the other party had immediately reported the news to Du Jue. Long Yanwei quickly stood up with a respectful expression on his face. Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang's situation is indeed not good. What's the reason? Du Jue frowned and directly asked for the reason. The Crimson Moon sect's disciples have surrounded them with the intention of killing them. Long Yanwei explained concisely. Hearing this, Du Jue laughed coldly. The Crimson Moon sect's members are getting bolder and bolder. They actually dared to attack Beichen. I think they're tired of living. Ziren and Shangwan Yingying, who were standing aside, could not help but look at each other when they saw this scene. Their minds were filled with questions. What's going on? Even though Du Jue and Di Beichen had indeed become close friends, Du Jue's sudden concern was still a little strange. Furthermore, Du Jue's tone was a little too frightening, wasn't it? He actually said that the Crimson Moon sect was tired of living. Does he not know what kind of colossus the Crimson Moon sect was? Chapter 4140. Just as Shangwan Yingying and Ziren were thinking about how Lord Long and Izihua would warn Du Jue after hearing this, they saw that the two of them did not dare to make sound. It was as if Du Jue was the boss. Shangwan Yingying and Zihua were dumbfounded when they saw this. What was going on? Could it be that Du Jue's background is so powerful? He was not even afraid of the sect master of the Crimson Moon sect. Long Yanwei and Zihua could not care less about what Shangwan Yingying and Zihua were thinking. Their hearts were filled with worry, and helplessness was written all over their faces. None of us had expected this to happen, so we planned to save them immediately, Long Yanwei quickly explained. They would rather offend the entire Crimson Moon sect than offend Du Jue. Furthermore, the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect had attacked Di Beichen, and this had undoubtedly angered Du Jue. Now, the sect master of the Crimson Moon sect should be thinking about how to appease Du Jue's anger. Now, they could only hope that Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang were all right. If anything were to happen to them, the Crimson Moon sect would be in for a bad time. Du Jue's eyes were filled with haze. I'll bring some men over personally. I'd like to see who would dare to attack Beichen. His deep, magnetic voice was filled with anger and murderous intent. He had finally found his son after much difficulty. If anything were to happen to Di Bei-chun, he would make those fellows wish they were dead. Hearing this, Long Yanwei and Yi Zihua did not dare to refute him. They nodded and said, "All right." Shangguan Yingying and Wen Xiren looked at each other. Their minds had turned into mush. They even suspected that they had been too tired over the past 2 days to the point that they were hallucinating. Everything that was happening before their eyes was inexplicable. What on earth is going on? Wen Xiren was dumbfounded. Why was Di Yujue so concerned about Di Bei-chun after not seeing him for a while? I don't know. Shangguan Yingying shook her head. Everything that had happened in front of her was clearly inexplicable. She couldn't figure out. Di Yujue immediately planned to set off to the training grounds. Xiren and Wen Xinya were also traveling together. Seeing this, Xiren and Wen Xinya hurriedly caught up and said, "I'll go with you." Yi Zihua looked at the fatigue Wen Xiren duo and could not help but say, "You two have been very tired these past few days. In addition, you're injured. You should rest well here." However, Xiren shook his head firmly. "No, I want to go with you. If we don't see Bei-chin and Hong Zhuang return safely, we won't be able to rest in peace," Shangguan Yingying said. If it weren't for the fact that they had no other choice, they would have liked to stay there. Unfortunately, under those circumstances, they simply did not have the strength to help Di Bei-chun and Wen Xinya. Now that they had found helpers, they could completely deal with Li Boyo and the others. Even if the two of them were not in good condition, there would not be any problems. Listening to the two's words, Di Yujue's gaze could not help but fall on Xiren and Wen Xinya. He was no stranger to these two. When he first met Di Bei-chun, these two were also by Di Bei-chun's side. Originally, he did not pay much attention to these two because all his attention was on Di Bei-chun and Bailey Hongzhuang's safety. Chapter 41-41. It seemed that these two people were indeed Di Bei-chun's best friends. Otherwise, they wouldn't have insisted on going with them at this point, because they were worried about the safety of Di Bei-chun and Shangguan Ying. Everyone's speed was extremely fast, and they entered the teleportation array without hesitation. Long Yanwei and Yi Zihua originally wanted to send other cultivators, but now that even Di Yujue had gone, they naturally didn't need to send anyone else. During the journey, Xiren couldn't help but look at Di Yujue and ask, "Young Master Di, we meet again." Hearing this, Di Yujue turned his head to look at Xiren and nodded with a gentle expression. That's right. Facing his son's best friend, he naturally admired him very much. "May I know when young Master Di came back? Why are you so concerned about Bei-chun?" Xiren was full of doubts. This Di Yujue's behavior was really too strange. This kind of kindness and concern had completely exceeded the scope of ordinary friends. Although according to their understanding, Di Bei-chun seemed to treat Di Yujue as a confidant, but suddenly being so close to him still made people feel that something was wrong. Yi Zihua looked at Xiren's puzzled look and couldn't help but laugh. "When Xiren, you still don't know, right? This young Master Di is Bei-chun's father." Following Yi Zihua's words, Xiren and Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but be startled. Then, their eyes widened and flashed with a thick sense of astonishment. They only suspected that they had heard wrongly. "Teacher, what did you just say?" Xiren stared at Yi Zihua, obviously unable to digest the news he had just heard. He had always guided Di Bei-chun to search for his biological father, but he had never thought that Di Yujue would actually be Bei-chun's father. Wasn't this too unbelievable? I said, "Young Master Di is Di Bei-chun's father." Shangguan Yingying and Xiren both fell into silence. When they looked at Di Yujue again, their eyes were filled with suspicion. Although Di Yujue in front of them looked handsome and had an extraordinary temperament and was obviously not an ordinary person, this person suddenly said that he was Di Bei-chun's father, no matter what. It was unbelievable. Di Bei-chun still didn't know who his father was. So how did he know that Di Bei-chun was his son? Although Bei-chun has never known who his biological father is. But how do you know that Bei-chun is your son? Xiren looked at Di Yujue with a cautious expression. Thinking back, when Bei-chun had just arrived at Penglai Island, Di Yujue hadn't confirmed this. Now that Di Bei-chun had made a name for himself, Yujue had to be cautious about this matter no matter what. Looking at Xiren's cautious and suspicious expression, Yujue couldn't help but chuckle. You think I'm lying to you? Seeing Yujue directly say his thoughts, Xiren was a little embarrassed, but he still said, After all, none of us know whether this matter is true or not. You should be the young master of the Cloud Sword sect, Yujue said with a faint smile. Following Yujue's words, Xiren couldn't help but be stunned. How do you know? Chapter 41-42. I've been a Tiangang sect, and sect master Sidhu told me. He told me that the young master of Cloud Sword sect and Bewitching grew up together and had a good relationship. When he knew that Bewitching was in danger and wanted to come to Penglai Island to find good medicine, he accompanied him. Now that I think about it, there is no other candidate except you. You've been to Tiangang sect? When Xiren was slightly taken aback. If it was said that he was extremely suspicious of Yujue's identity before, at this moment, when he heard Yujue mention the Heavenly Dipper sect, he suddenly believed a lot more. Yujue nodded slightly. To be honest, when I left Penglai Island before, I found the news about my son's whereabouts, so I set off to the outside world and found Tiangang sect all the way. I just didn't expect that I had already seen Bewitching, but I didn't recognize him. It's really helpless. Then you confirmed Bewitching's identity after you went to Tiangang sect? Xiren's gaze gradually changed, and he couldn't help but look at Yujue in front of him again. Since childhood, he and Bewitching had discussed the issue of his life for a long time. He had always wondered why Bewitching's parents would abandon him. Bewitching was obviously very good-looking and had no problems. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be like this. That's right, Yujue nodded. Over the years, I've been looking for Bewitching's whereabouts. I've been to many places, but I didn't get the right news. Until I went to Tiangang sect this time, I was sure that Bewitching was my son. Then how can you prove the relationship between you and Bewitching? Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but ask. She had always been wary of people who appeared inexplicably. In the past, she might not have been so cautious about everything. However, ever since she came to Penglai Island, she realized that the people here were too good at hiding and deceiving. If she was not careful, she might be deceived by the other party. Now, Bewitching was good at everything, and he had also obtained the inheritance of the power of darkness. Needless to say, his future was limitless. This was not something that could be casually claimed to be his father. When Long Yanwei and Yizihua saw when Xiren and Yizihua cautiously guarding against Yujue and worried that Yujue would take advantage of Bewitching, their gazes became unusually helpless. With Yujue's status, who knew how many people would cry and shout to be his son. However, now that Yujue was beside them, the two of them couldn't say anything. However, Yujue looked at when Xiren and Yizihua's expressions and felt that it was very interesting. Although the two of them didn't say anything, it could be seen from their performance that they were sincere about Bewitching. The suspicion and fear on their faces were obviously because they were worried about Bewitching. He was also happy for Bewitching. Do you think this is okay? Suddenly, a jade pendant appeared in Yujue's hand. He believed that as Bewitching's best friends, Xiren and Yizihua would be able to recognize it. Sure enough, when he took out the jade pendant, Xiren and Shangguan Yingying's expressions changed. Their eyes flashed with a strong sense of astonishment. Huh? Shangguan Yingying said in surprise. Isn't this jade pendant exactly the same as the one Bewitching has been wearing? How do you have it? Chapter 41-43. When Xiren looked at the jade pendant in Yujue's hand, he was already convinced of Yujue's words. In fact, he also knew in his heart that Yujue was definitely not an ordinary person. There was no need to lie to him at all. However, he still wanted to confirm for Bewitching. Since Yujue could take out this token, all of this must be true. He definitely wouldn't lie to them. Xiren, could this person really be Bewitching's father? Shangguan Yingying whispered. Xiren nodded slightly. It seems to be true. I didn't think so before, but now that you mention it, I feel that Bewitching and him do look a little alike. You're right. Beichin is so handsome. If an ordinary person came and said that he was Beichin's father, I wouldn't believe it all. However, this young Master D is also very handsome. I think it's true. That's right. Do you remember when Beichin first saw him? He acted very strangely. Usually, with Beichin's character, he wouldn't take the initiative to get close to other cultivators. However, this young Master D seemed like an old friend at first sight. Now that I think about it, this should be kinship. Now that he thought about all of this, Xiren could understand. From D Beichin's different attitude towards D Yujue, to the inexplicable way in which the two of them became close friends. In fact, it was because of their blood relationship. Otherwise, with the personalities of these two people, it was likely that they would not trust a person so easily. That's right. Shangguan Yingying's eyes lit up, but didn't mention it before, so I didn't think about it. Now that I think about it, it was indeed so. It turned out that it had already been revealed back then, but Beichin and young Master D didn't know about it at that time. This is great. A faint smile appeared on Xiren's face. Beichin has been wanting to find his biological parents all these years. Now that they have finally appeared, I'm sure Beichin will be very happy when he finds out. Shangguan Yingying nodded slightly, and then frowned quietly. That's not right. Since Child D has a powerful background, why did he lose Beichin? I don't know. Xiren spread out his hands. Let Beichin understand this matter himself. No matter what, we are just outsiders. This matter is not something we can intervene in. Right now, I can only hope that Beichin and Hong Zhuang are safe and sound. Now that we know about Beichin's background, as long as they are safe, it is really worth celebrating. Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with worry. Along the way, although they were talking, in fact, none of them slowed down. Di Yujue and the others were naturally very fast, so the two of them had to use all their skills to be able to keep up. No one was willing to waste any more time on this journey because if Beichin and Shangguan Yingying were to be in danger because of this little bit of time, none of them wanted to see that. For a time, everyone was hurrying on. After Bailey Hongzhuang studied this restriction for a long time, her eyes suddenly lit up and a faint smile appeared on her face. Noticing the change in Bailey Hongzhuang's expression, the three beasts immediately rushed to Bailey Hongzhuang's side and asked curiously, "Master, did you find something?" Chapter 41-44. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, the faces of the three beasts were filled with a hint of surprise. "Master, I knew you would be able to think of a way." As she spoke, Xiaohei could not help but turn towards Bailong provocatively. She raised her brows as if to say, "What do you think? I told you that my master could do it, right? You just didn't believe me. Now, you have no choice but to admit it." However, Bailong could not be bothered with Xiaohei's provocation at this moment. She was completely immersed in Bailey Hongzhuang's claim that she could break the restriction. Instantly, Bailong shuddered and rushed towards Bailey Hongzhuang. Her large, pitch-black eyes flickered with a thick light of anticipation. "What did you say? Say it again." Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Bailong, who could not hide her excitement. She also noticed the trace of fear in the depths of Bailong's eyes. She was clearly afraid of being disappointed. Bailong has been here for far too many years. Perhaps she has already forgotten what the outside world looks like. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and nodded at the thought of this. "You heard me right. I've found a way to break this restriction." "What kind of method have you found? How do you break this restriction?" Bailong's eyes flickered with a bright light. They were as resplendent as the stars in the sky. At this moment, her gaze towards Bailey Hongzhuang was filled with admiration and anticipation. Bailong has been here for so many years, yet she has not been able to find a way to break this restriction. However, Bailey Hongzhuang has only been here for a few days, and she has already found a way to break this restriction. Isn't this a little too shocking? I've said it before. This restriction is actually a type of formation. As long as we can find a way to break this formation, we'll naturally be able to break this restriction. You mean to say that you found a way to break this formation? Bailey Hongzhuang nodded gently. That's right. I've found a way. However, in order to break this restriction and bring you out of here, we'll need your help. Bailong was shocked. Her eyes flashed with astonishment. My help? How can I help? Although I have found a way to break it, the expert who set up this restriction is simply too strong. My current cultivation base is not enough. Only by borrowing some of my power will you be able to break this restriction. Her ink-black phoenix eyes shone with a wise and far-sighted light. She had already found a way, but she needed to gather a certain amount of power. Fortunately, this power was not limited to one person. They could work together. Is what you said true? The white dragon still had some doubts. Suddenly, such a young lady appeared and said that she could break the restriction. Moreover, she also needed a help. Could it be that the person he had been waiting for all this time was such a master? Wasn't this strength a little too weak? However, she only remembered that whoever could take her away would be her master. She did not mention how to take her away. In that case, this method was not wrong. Of course it's true. Seeing that the white dragon was still doubting his master, the white lion's eyes were filled with displeasure. It's fine if you don't believe me. Anyway, you should be the one staying here. Bailey Hongzhuang did not say a word either. She only stared quietly at the white dragon. This was a matter for the white dragon to consider. If the white dragon was unwilling, there was nothing she could do. Chapter 41-45. Bai Long has not been out for a long time. Now, she felt that as long as she could get out, she was willing to try any method. Furthermore, Bailey Hongzhuang did not look like a bad person. Furthermore, although the three beasts' attitude toward her needs to be improved, they were still acceptable overall. Therefore, she did not reject Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. Next, Bailey Hongzhuang told Bai Long how to break the restriction. The process was very simple. She would find a point to break the restriction, and she only needed Bai Long's help to inject energy. As long as the energy has reached a certain level, it would naturally be able to break the restriction directly. She had been here for a few days and did not know when Beichun would finish accepting the inheritance. Everyone must be very worried about her safety during these few days. Therefore, she also hoped that she could break the restriction as soon as possible so that she could reunite with everyone. I only need to inject energy, right? Bai Long asked. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. That's right. However, this requires a lot of energy. You have to be mentally prepared. I'll do my best. If you're ready, let's begin. All right. Outside the ruins, Li Boyo and the others had turned the ruins upside down, but they still did not see Bailey Hongzhuang's figure. Everyone felt that it was very strange. I don't believe that this Bailey Hongzhuang can go to heaven and earth, right? She should be in the ruins. It's impossible for her to go anywhere else. Why can't we find her? Qian Feilong could not hide the gloominess on his face. He had spent so much effort only to end up with nothing. One could imagine the gloominess in his heart. Deep Beichun has gone to accept the inheritance. That's why we can't see him in the ruins. Could Bailey Hongzhuang have gone to accept the inheritance like him? Mu Zhe frowned. Various thoughts flashed through his mind. Although this was not very likely, based on the current situation, he could not think of any other possibility. How is this possible? Li Boyo immediately denied Mu Zhe's guess. I don't believe that this Bailey Hongzhuang is so powerful. This inheritance clearly belongs to Di Beichun. How could she have the opportunity to receive the inheritance? Then why is this happening? There are no other places in the ruins. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang has already left? I don't know. Li Boyo's expression also revealed a bit of helplessness. From the bottom of his heart, he was unwilling to admit how powerful Bailey Hongzhuang was, but the situation in front of him was really inexplicable. Let's wait here. It's been a while since Di Beichun received the inheritance. Even if we can't wait for Bailey Hongzhuang, we can wait for Di Beichun. Li Boyo looked at Qian Feilong and Mu Zhe. He was most worried that Qian Feilong and the others would choose to leave. Once they left, he would naturally not be able to avenge himself. He was really unwilling to accept the situation. Fortunately, Qian Feilong and Mu Zhe had no intention of leaving. They immediately nodded. Okay, we'll wait here. Hearing this, Li Boyo was relieved. After Bailey Hongzhuang found the formation eye, she immediately informed the white dragon to inject energy. Chapter 41-46. After Bai Long had poured his elemental energy into the eye of the formation, everyone could feel that the restrictive barrier was beginning to fluctuate. Bai Long's eyes lit up when he noticed this. It seems that Bailey Hongzhuang had not lied to him. This was really effective against the restrictive barrier. However, as he poured more and more elemental energy into the restrictive barrier, Bai Long only noticed that the restrictive barrier was fluctuating less and less. However, it was still not completely broken. His expression turned ugly. It can't be right. Wasn't this restriction a little too abnormal? Even with so much energy, it still can't be broken. How far do we have to go? When Bailey Hongzhuang and the three beasties noticed this, their eyes flashed with astonishment. The amount of energy required was just too shocking. It seems that it's not that easy to become a dragon's master. Xiaohei sighed ruefully. Although she had already guessed that it would not be that simple, this scene had still exceeded her expectations. Bai Long's previous master must have been very powerful. With such a powerful restrictive barrier, he must have been a rare expert. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly spoke. Even from the perspective of her past life, this person was definitely an expert, an extraordinary expert. Bai Long noticed that Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest were still in the mood to chat at a time like this. He could not help but say, "Stop chatting. Come and help me. I can't hold on much longer." Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the three beasties realized that Bai Long's expression was extremely ugly. It was obvious that he could not hold on much longer. When they saw this, they immediately joined the team that was pouring their elemental energy into the restrictive barrier. Through the restrictive barrier's fluctuating condition, they could already sense that it would not take long for the restrictive barrier to disappear completely. Before that happens, they must give it their all. Otherwise, if they fail, all their previous efforts would be wasted. After Bailey Hongzhuang and the three beasties joined in, the restrictive barrier's fluctuations became more and more intense. Bai Long heaved a sigh of relief. His energy was almost at its limit. It was a good thing that he could breathe a sigh of relief now. However, this was only temporary. This was because Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had discovered that the array core was simply a bottomless pit. The amount of energy required was simply too great. Xiaohei could not help but cry out when she saw Bai Long's gradually pale face. "Bai Long, you must hold on." Although their strength was not bad, they still had to rely on the white dragon's strength. If the white dragon could not do it, they would not be able to complete it either. White Dragon nodded, his eyes shining with determination and persistence. "I will persevere until the end." She had waited for so many years and finally had a glimmer of hope. She absolutely could not give up just like that. If she missed this opportunity, she didn't know when she would be able to see the light again. She had been here for too long, and she really didn't want to stay here any longer. Therefore, the white dragon persisted until her vision turned black. Bailey Hongzhuang caught the white dragon, but found that a mark suddenly appeared on her and the white dragon. Seeing this, her eyes couldn't help but flash with deep astonishment. This is Bai Shi's eyes also flashed with astonishment. "Master, have you formed a contract with Bai Long? When did you complete it?" Chapter 41-47. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was filled with confusion. She had not signed a contract with the white dragon at all. How could she have completed the contract all of a sudden? "I didn't do this. I don't know what's going on either." The three beasties were stunned when they heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words. However, they did not suspect anything. They knew that Bailey Hongzhuang did not have the time to do all this. This sudden situation was indeed a little too strange. "Although I don't know what's going on, perhaps the white dragon will know. Unfortunately, it's now unconscious. Let's put it into the chaos ring first." Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the unconscious white dragon. She had needed too much energy, and the white dragon had overdrawn its energy. If this had happened in the past, Bailey Hongzhuang would have been worried that the white dragon would be in trouble after it found out about the secret of the chaos ring. However, the white dragon had signed a master-servant contract with her and would never betray her. Hence, she no longer needed to worry about this. The three beasties nodded when they heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words. Master, the white dragon should be all right? Don't worry, it's fine. It's just that it's exhausted too much energy and needs to rest for a while to recover. That's good. A smile appeared on Xiaohei's face. When it wakes up and realizes that it's out of the chaos ring, it'll be very happy. As soon as she said this, Bailey Hongzhuang, Xiaobai, and Baisher seemed to have imagined the scene that would unfold. They found it rather funny. Although the white dragon pretended to be mature in front of them, the details that it had inadvertently revealed told them that the white dragon's thoughts were actually very simple. It might even jump up in excitement when the time comes. Now that we've rescued the white dragon, let's hurry up and meet up with everyone. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a bright light. She had inexplicably disappeared for so many days. Presumably, everyone was very concerned about her. She had to meet up with everyone first so that everyone could rest assured. The three beasties also nodded and immediately followed behind Bailey Hongzhuang as they walked towards the main hall in front of them. So much time has passed. I wonder if Bewitching has finished receiving his inheritance? I wonder how powerful he will become after receiving the inheritance. A curious look appeared on Xiaohei's face. Bewitching is really something. Ever since his physique changed, he has become more and more powerful. In the future, with Bewitching protecting Master, we don't have to worry anymore. Baisher smiled. Thinking back to how Bewitching was unable to improve his cultivation, he felt extremely emotional. After Bailey Hongzhuang and the three beasts rushed back to the main hall, they found that there was no one in the main hall. Seeing this, the man and the three beasts couldn't help but be stunned. Their faces were full of confusion. Ying, Xiren? Bailey Hongzhuang tried to call out their names in the main hall, but there was no response. For a moment, her expression couldn't help but change. Where's everyone? Why isn't anyone here? Xiaobai scanned her surroundings. Her eyes were filled with confusion. Logically speaking, since Master has yet to emerge, everyone shouldn't have left. Chapter 41-48. Bailey Hongzhuang's ink-black phoenix-like eyes flickered with a light of deep thought. Her pretty face was solemn as she carefully observed her surroundings. Even though she did not know what had happened, she had a vague feeling that something must have happened, which was why Xiren and the others had left. Based on her understanding of Xiren and the others, even if everyone had gone to look for her, logically speaking, one of them would have stayed behind to wait for her in case she appeared. It was impossible for all of them to have left. However, even though she was mentally prepared for this, Bailey Hongzhuang still held on to a sliver of hope that nothing had happened to everyone. Then, she and the three beasties walked out of the Great Hall and began to search for everyone. However, they did not hear any response even after searching the entire Great Hall for a while. When they returned to the Great Hall, both she and the three beasties had a rather gloomy expression on their faces. What happened? Why are they not here? Xiaohei's eyes flickered with a puzzled light. She could not figure it out no matter how hard she thought about it. Previously, when they had gone to the White Dragon's place, this place had clearly been very safe. Furthermore, based on what the owner of the ruins had done, he did not have any murderous intent towards these young cultivators. Logically speaking, this could not possibly be related to the owner of the ruins. If that was the case, could it be that other cultivators had entered this place? However, everyone had clearly left at that time. So who would come here again? If my guess is correct, I'm afraid that it's the members of the Crimson Moon sect. Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was gloomy. Apart from this possibility, she could not think of any other. Li Boyo must hate them to the core. Back then, she had been rather puzzled as to why he had left so easily. She had thought that he had lost all hope and had been taught a lesson. That was why he had chosen to leave. However, based on the current situation, she was afraid that she had underestimated everything. Based on Li Boyo's deep thoughts, his previous actions were probably just to trick Wan Yanling and the others into leaving. Her heart gradually sank at the thought of this. If the cultivators from a Crimson Moon sect were to rush back, based on their powers, Xiren and the others would certainly face a great deal of pressure. Their chances of survival would also be very small. Thinking of this possibility, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes gradually sharpened. She only hoped that none of this was real. Otherwise, she would definitely not let Li Boyo and the group of people from the Crimson Moon sect off. However, while her heart was filled with anger, Bailey Hongzhuang also had a trace of fear in her heart. She couldn't imagine what she would do if something happened to Shangguan Yingying and the others. They were all her most cherished friends. Not only her, but Beichen would also not be able to bear it after knowing all this. Master, do you mean that the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect have returned? Xiaohei could not help but widen her eyes. There was a hint of fear in her eyes. Other than them, there won't be anyone else, Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. Wan Yinling and the others were fellow disciples of the same sect. Naturally, they would not do such a thing. There was no enmity between them and the cultivators of the 100 Flowers Order. Naturally, there was no need for them to do such a thing. Furthermore, the 100 Flowers Order had always been kind to her. This would not benefit them at all. Chapter 41-49. If it's really them, Li Boyo and the others are simply too despicable. Xiaohei's face was filled with anger. Initially, they had thought that their journey would be very successful. They never thought that such a thing would happen in the end. I also think that Master's judgment is very correct. Aside from this possibility, I'm afraid that there are no other possibilities. What should we do now? Baisher's gaze was complicated. I wonder when they had returned. Could they still be outside the ruins? Even though he was filled with the desire to avenge everyone, based on their current situation, it would be very dangerous for them to face the cultivators from the Crimson Moon sect. After all, only Bailey Hongzhuang was left. Besides, the White Dragon had fallen into a coma. They were no match for them at all. We've been at the White Dragon's place for a few days now. They probably won't keep watch over us, will they? Xiaobai pondered. However, Bailey Hongzhuang gently shook her head. Her expression was filled with certainty. They definitely will. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the three beasts were shocked. Master, according to what you're saying, they're outside the ruins now? Li Boyo is now a cripple. It wasn't easy for the cultivators from the Crimson Moon sect to agree to avenge him. He won't give up so easily, so he'll definitely choose to wait outside and capture us all in one fell swoop. Her pitch-black phoenix-like eyes flickered with a wise light. Even though there were no clues to prove this, according to Bailey Hongzhuang's judgment, this was definitely the closest possibility to the truth. Based on what you've said, we can't go out now. Xiaohei's expression has turned serious. If there were so many opponents outside, they would be walking right into a trap if they went out. Xiaobai, shrink your body and go out to take a look. Inform us once you've understood the situation. Bailey Hongzhuang said. She needed to understand the situation before coming up with a plan. I'll go right away. Xiaobai nodded without hesitation. She then shrunk her body and hid in the darkness. Li Boyo and the others have been waiting outside the ruins. As time passed, their patience gradually dissipated. However, at this moment, they suddenly heard some movement coming from the ruins. After noticing this, everyone's eyes suddenly lit up, and their expressions became spirited. Is this Bailey Hongzhuang or Di Beichen? Muze looked at the door of the ruins thoughtfully. He could only hear some shouts coming from the ruins, but he was unable to determine who it was because it was too far away. It must be Bailey Hongzhuang, Li Boyo said with certainty. Eldest senior brother, how did you know? Qian Feilong raised his eyebrows. Based on the faint movements that were transmitted over, it was impossible to determine who exactly it was. My intuition. Trust me, it can't be wrong. Li Boyo was very certain. If it was Di Beichen, he would have come out directly because he doesn't know if Bailey Hongzhuang and the others are waiting for him inside. However, this person is obviously shouting for someone. Only Bailey Hongzhuang would do that because she noticed that when Xiren and the others are gone. Hearing Li Boyo's words, Muze and Qian Feilong could not help but look at each other. Their brows furrowed slightly, but they still nodded. Chapter 4150. Let's go in and take a look, Qian Feilong hurriedly said. They had been waiting here for so long for Bailey Hongzhuang to appear. Now that she had finally appeared, they naturally had to act as soon as possible. However, just as everyone was about to move, Li Boyo raised his right hand and stopped them. No, we can't go in now. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. They looked at Li Boyo suspiciously as they could not understand why he would say such a thing. However, Li Boyo explained his reason for doing so in the next second. We've searched the entire ruins several times, but we couldn't find Bailey Hongzhuang. It's obvious that she has some special method or entered a special place in the ruins. If we go in like this, she might have hidden herself before we arrive. By then, we'll have wasted our efforts and still won't be able to find her. Hearing this, everyone finally understood. Immediately, their gazes towards Li Boyo were filled with a trace of emotion. As their eldest senior brother, Li Boyo had always been brave and resourceful. Many of his strategies had always been devised by Li Boyo. Now, although Li Boyo had become an ordinary person who could not cultivate, he was still extraordinarily quick-witted. At least, this was something that they had not thought of before. However, after Li Boyo mentioned it, they realized that it was indeed the case. Eldest senior brother, what do you think we should do then? Muze asked. It's very simple. We'll retreat a distance away from here and wait for Bailey Hongzhuang to come out before we take action. Li Boyo's lips slowly curled into a smile. He wanted to see how Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to escape from his grasp this time. All right. Everyone nodded without hesitation and followed Li Boyo's arrangement. Xiao Bai carefully arrived at the entrance of the ruins. According to its master's judgment, Li Boyo and the rest would definitely be waiting here. Therefore, even though its body was very small and would not be easily discovered, it still moved slowly. After all, the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect were all experts. As long as it moved slightly, it would be noticed by everyone. However, when it arrived at the entrance of the ruin, it realized that there was no movement at all, and there was no figure in sight. After looking around carefully, Xiao Bai couldn't help but walk out of the ruins. She looked around and found that there was indeed no trace of him. Seeing this, Xiao Bai could not help but frown. A trace of doubt and contemplation appeared on her face. Why is there no one here? Xiao Bai could not understand. Then why did Xiren and the others disappear? Or did the Crimson Moon sect members leave after killing them? Xiao Bai quickly returned to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. It had to report this news to its master as soon as possible. After hearing all this from Xiao Bai, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but frown. Was my judgment wrong? Xiao Bai, did you really look carefully? Is there really no one here? Xiao He could not help but ask again. Xiao Bai nodded. I've walked around in a circle. There really isn't any movement. Chapter 41-51. Master, could it be that when Xiren and the others had just left not too long ago? Baisher inquired. At the moment, they had no idea when Xiren and the others had left. They could have left a few days ago, or they could have just left. I think that the Crimson Moon sect might have left after attacking Ying and the others, Xiao He said. What should we do now? The three beasts furrowed their brows. Right now, they couldn't figure out what had happened. They wouldn't be able to understand anything if they stayed in the ruins unless they went out to take a look. However, if they went out, they would have to worry about whether there would be any problems. It was really troublesome. Bailey Hongzhuang pondered for a moment before saying, Let's go out and take a look. They would only be able to understand the situation after leaving the ruins. It would be best if they could find traces of Xiren and the others nearby. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang had made her decision, the three beasts expressed their agreement and followed Hongzhuang out of the ruins. After Bailey Hongzhuang walked out of the ruins, she realized that the situation was just as Xiao Bai had said. There was no movement in the surroundings at all. After checking around, she realized that there was no aura in the surroundings. Clearly, no one was hiding here. Bailey Hongzhuang realized this, and the suspicion in her eyes grew even more intense. She believed that her previous judgment was not wrong, and she also believed that Li Boyo would not give up until he killed her. So where did the problem lie? Could it be that the people who had returned were not Li Boyo and the others, but someone else? At that moment, Bailey Hongzhuang could not understand everything. Master, let's go around and look for traces of Xiren and the others, Baishir said slowly. The white lion spoke slowly with a complicated expression. It did not dare to speak too clearly. If when Xiren and the others had really died here, they would definitely be able to find their corpses nearby. After all, there was no need for the other party to destroy the corpses. Bailey Hongzhuang naturally understood what Baishir meant and immediately nodded. All right, let's go and take a look. In the next moment, one man and 3 beasts began to move, searching for traces of Xiren and the others. However, after searching for a while, they did not find anything. For such a situation, Bailey Hongzhuang's heart was still somewhat happy. At the very least, the fact that he had not discovered them meant that there was still a possibility that Xiren and the others were still alive. Bailey Hongzhuang could only hope that everyone had been distracted by something and that nothing had happened. After all, judging from the surrounding situation, there seemed to be no traces of a fight. This made Bailey Hongzhuang feel a little more hopeful. She really couldn't imagine how she would accept all this if something happened to Shangguan, Yingying, and the others. Master, there aren't any traces around here. Could it be that things aren't as complicated as we thought? Xiaohei couldn't help but ask. Chapter 41-52. It would be great if that was really the case. Bailey Hongzhuang sighed, but her expression did not reveal the slightest bit of joy. However, I have a feeling that things are not that simple. Something must have happened. Otherwise, Xiren and the others would have left behind a note for me before leaving. They would not have disappeared without a trace. She had this kind of intuition because when Xiren and the others had disappeared too suddenly and did not leave any traces behind. This was also a kind of problem. However, she had not discovered anything, so she could only think this way. She hoped that something urgent had happened, and that was why Xiren and the others had left in a hurry. Or perhaps they had discovered something in the ruins and did not have time to leave a message for her before leaving. It was just like how she had gone to the White Dragon's place. She did not have time to say anything. Actually, this was not impossible. After all, these ruins were very strange. No one else had been able to find the White Dragon's secret chamber, but she had. This meant that there might be other secret chambers in the ruins. Soon after, Bailey Hongzhuang and the 3 beasties searched the area for the others, but still did not find any trace of them. However, just as they were about to leave, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly noticed a piece of black cloth on the ground. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but walk over and pick up the cloth. After examining it carefully, she identified the owner of the cloth. This is Yunjue's clothes. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly spoke as her expression turned solemn. Mo Yunjue's power has reached the starlight state, but the other party had still been able to cut his clothes. This showed how powerful the other party was. This was definitely a situation that would only occur when they had encountered danger. Bailey Hongzhuang's previous hope of getting lucky immediately disappeared. Indeed, danger had occurred. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the 3 beasties could not help but fall into silence. It seems that things are as I've said. The cultivators from the Crimson Moon sect must have returned and attacked them before leaving. I'm afraid that the others are not too far away. The hearts of the woman and the 3 beasties sank. This was the situation that they did not want to accept the most. Unfortunately, they had no choice but to believe it now. The woman and the 3 beasties continued to walk forward. After walking for a distance, Bailey Hongzhuang found another piece of cloth. It was still Mo Yunjue's clothes. However, just as the 3 beasties were about to continue forward, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly stopped. Something's not right. The 3 beasties looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in confusion. They did not know what Bailey Hongzhuang meant. Master, what's the matter? Something's not right thing, Bailey Hongzhuang said. If Bailey Hongzhuang, Bailey Hongzhuang. Before, Bailey Hongzhuang was so immersed in worrying about everyone's safety that she didn't even think about other possibilities. Of course, Bailey Hongzhuang is Zhuang Hongzhuang. We might have fallen into a trap. Retreat quickly, Bailey Hongzhuang said as she hurriedly retreated. It was obvious that someone had deliberately lured her in a certain direction. Chapter 41:53. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and the three beasties hurriedly retreated, several auras quickly approached them. Bailey Hongzhuang and the three beasties' faces turned ugly when they sensed the approaching auras. Damn it, these fellows are actually luring us in on purpose. Xiaohei could not help but curse out loud. She never thought that such a possibility would occur. These fellows are far too scheming. Not too long after, Qian Feilong and the rest caught up to them. Noticing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang's delicate face suddenly showed a trace of dignified disgust. It's really you. It seems that her initial judgment had been right. The ones who had returned were Li Boyo and the rest. Li Boyo flashed a complacent smile when he saw Bailey Hongzhuang in the flesh. Bailey Hongzhuang, after hiding for so long, we finally found you in the flesh. Qian Feilong and the rest turned their attention to Bailey Hongzhuang. They were now left with 10 people. Even though Li Boyo has lost his ability to fight and another cultivator's leg was injured and had lost his ability to fight, there were still 8 cultivators who could participate in the battle. Faced with such a situation, Bailey Hongzhuang could only face death. Bailey Hongzhuang stared icily at Li Boyo. She now felt that Li Boyo was even more detestable than the deceased Li Yunyu. They were indeed brothers. Even though he had fallen into such dire straits, he still loved to stir up trouble. He was truly detestable. Where's Yingying and the rest? Bailey Hongzhuang asked. Even though she had a bad feeling when she saw Yun Ju's tattered robes earlier on, she would not give up until the very last moment. Besides, she noticed that the Crimson Moon Sect's team had lost half of its members. If Mo Yunjue and the others had really fought with the cultivators from the Crimson Moon Sect, then the other people from the Crimson Moon Sect must have died at the hands of Mo Yunjue. She knew very well that even if the cultivators of the Crimson Moon Sect were very powerful, they would not let the Crimson Moon Sect have a good time dealing with Mo Yunjue and the others. Shangguan Yingying? Li Boyo raised his eyebrows and the smile in his eyes deepened. Naturally, he died in our hands. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but frown. Nonsense. You're already at death's door. Why should I lie to you? The corners of Li Boyo's lips curled up slightly as he looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in ridicule. You don't know. When we killed our way in, they didn't even think that we would come back. However, their reaction speed is not bad. They were actually able to escape to the outside of the ruins. However, even if they managed to escape, it would be of no use. In the end, they would still die in our hands. Qian Feilong and the others laughed along as well. They understood that Li Boyo had said this because he wanted to make Bailey Hongzhuang feel pain. Once she was in pain and her condition deteriorated, it would be even easier for them to deal with her. Bailey Hongzhuang's heart sank. If Li Boyo had said that everyone had died in the ruins, she could conclude that everything that Li Boyo had said was false. However, everything that Li Boyo had just said was just as she had expected. She could not find any loopholes in his story. She had no choice but to believe him. Do you have any evidence to prove it? Bailey Hongzhuang asked slowly. Chapter 41:54. However, I'm taking this out. You should be able to recognize it, right? As he spoke, Li Boyo slowly took out a few Chinquan bags. I didn't expect them to have so many things in their Chinquan bags, even though they had just become Penglai Palace's inner palace disciples. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the Chinquan bags, and her gaze could not help but freeze. Weren't these Xiren and Shangguan Yingying's Chinquan bags? In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's black eyes became deep. A storm was brewing in her eyes, gathering and ready to erupt at any time. A trace of dark red, killing intent bloomed in her eyes, like an enchanting Dachira flower, beautiful but full of danger. She understood that the Chinquan bag was the most precious thing to every cultivator. Many treasures were placed in the Chinquan bag. No one would give up the Chinquan bag until the last moment. Now that the Chinquan bags had fallen into Li Boyo's hands, then Shangguan Yingying and the others were probably doomed. After seeing this scene, the three beasts' faces became extremely ugly. When they looked at Li Boyo and the others again, their eyes were burning with murderous intent. These damn guys, they actually killed Xiren and the others. Do you believe me now? Li Boyo said with a chuckle. Muze's gaze fell on Li Boyo. He really admired Li Boyo's methods. These two Chinquan bags were given to him by Xiren and Shangguan Yingying. After returning, Li Boyo found out that he had let them go, so he took out the Chinquan bags as an apology. Unexpectedly, Li Boyo took out the Chinquan bags now, and it became evidence that Xiren and Shangguan Yingying were dead. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's sudden change of expression, Li Boyo felt a burst of joy. He recalled that when he was down and out, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were laughing at him. Now, he finally saw Bailey Hongzhuang's painful expression. You don't have to be too sad. They just died a few days earlier than you. You can go down and accompany them soon. Li Boyo spread out his hands, and the smile on his face was like that of a demon. As for your lover, after he receives the inheritance, we will immediately send him down to accompany you. We won't let you be alone underground. In your dreams. Huh? Li Boyo laughed. What? Are you still unwilling to admit this fact? Do you think you can slip away from so many of us? Stop dreaming. Muze also said, Bailey Hongzhuang, you should have also obtained the inheritance of the ruins before, right? He had always been curious about this. There is clearly no place to hide in the ruins, but Bailey Hongzhuang was still inside, and none of them could find her. However, Bailey Hongzhuang only glanced at Muze coldly and was too lazy to reply. Seeing this, Muze's eyes turned icy cold. Even if you've obtained the inheritance of the ruins, it's useless. This power of darkness will never have the chance to be revealed to the world. You fellows, you'll all die a horrible death. Don't be stubborn. Li Boyo waved his hand nonchalantly. Now, we'll send you to heaven. Once Li Boyo had spoken, Qian Feilong and the others immediately began to move, planning to surround Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 4155. Master, based on our current situation, I'm afraid that we're no match for them, Bai Shi reminded her. If their opponents had been few in number, they might have been able to put up a fight. However, there are simply too many opponents now. Furthermore, Qian Feilong and Muze were both Starlight Realm cultivators. It was almost impossible for them to defeat them. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang's hatred for Qian Feilong has reached its peak, she did not lose her rationality because of this. Under these circumstances, the only thing she could do was to escape. 10 years was not too late for a gentleman to take revenge. As long as she could escape today, it would not be too late for her to exact her revenge one by one. Anyway, these fellows were all in the Crimson Moon sect. When the time comes, it would be very convenient for her to find them. Let's escape first. Once we've put some distance between us and them, we'll hide in the Chaos Ring. I believe that they won't be able to find us. Her pitch-black and deep eyes flickered with a quick-witted light. This was the safest way to escape. The Chaos Ring could be said to be a great tool for escaping. However, there must be enough distance between both parties. Otherwise, if the Chaos Ring were to fall into the hands of others, the consequences would be unthinkable. Upon hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the three beasts expressed their agreement. This was indeed the best way to escape. In the blink of an eye, when Qian Feilong and the others had begun to make their move, Bailey Hongzhuang had immediately run forward. Li Boyo and the others had also guessed that Bailey Hongzhuang would choose to escape. Their reaction speed was extremely fast, and they hurriedly chased after her. Bailey Hongzhuang unleashed her shape-shifting technique. She did not hesitate to circulate all her energy and raised her speed to the maximum. However, as she was escaping, she realized that Muze and the others were not slow either. They were following closely behind her, so closely that she could not disappear from the sight of the Crimson Moon sect cultivators. Master, these fellows are very fast as well. Xiaobai's expression was a little ugly. Her master's speed had always been fast. She never thought that she would not be able to shake them off this time. Bailey Hongzhuang's face darkened. I almost forgot that the Crimson Moon sect's movement techniques are very famous. Therefore, the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect are very good at speed. She had heard this from Run Ziheng in the past. However, at that time, she did not have much contact with the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect. Therefore, she did not take this matter to heart. It was only at this moment that she remembered everything. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang's helplessness, Qian Feilong and the others also felt very depressed. This Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation is lower than the two of us. How can she be so fast? This kind of movement martial skill seems to be even more powerful than what we have. Mu Zhe nodded slightly. This Bailey Hongzhuang is not an ordinary person. Not only is she extremely skilled in medicine, her strength is also not bad. Penglai Palace treats her like a treasure, so since we have decided to attack her, we must kill her. Otherwise, if she leaves alive, we will be in trouble in the future. If he had not made a promise to Li Boyo, he would not have wanted to offend Bailey Hongzhuang. When it comes to dealing with this kind of fellow, it must be dealt with cleanly. Otherwise, she would be like a hornet's nest and would definitely be asking for trouble. Chapter 4156. Seeing Qian Feilong's confidence, Mu Zhe was surprised. Although he felt that they could do this without any problems, Qian Feilong seemed to be implying something. Didn't you notice which direction Bailey Hongzhuang is escaping in? Qian Feilong smiled faintly. Hearing Qian Feilong's words, Mu Zhe couldn't help but look ahead. Suddenly, a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. That's right, Qian Feilong nodded. That's the place. Bailey Hongzhuang is digging her own grave this time. It seems that we don't have to worry anymore. Mu Zhe chuckled. He could finally put down the rock in his heart. As long as he could solve this problem today, he would have nothing to worry about. As Bailey Hongzhuang moved forward, she suddenly realized that the sky in front of her was getting darker and darker. Her expression became complicated. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be like this at this time. What's going on? Although she was puzzled, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't have the time to think about it. She was forced to continue moving forward. Once she changed direction, the others would catch up with her. However, as Bailey Hongzhuang got closer, she realized where she was. In her line of sight, skeletons were dancing wildly. Isn't it daytime now? Why are there skeletons here? Xiaohei's expression turned ugly. They were already in a terrible situation. Now that there were skeletons blocking their way, they couldn't pass at all. It was terrible. I didn't think that we would come here. Baisher immediately understood everything. A.O. Ling Xiao had said this when he introduced the entrance to the upper realm. Regardless of day or night, there were skeletons everywhere. Therefore, only cultivators of the Starlight Realm and above could pass through here to reach the entrance to the upper realm. Previously, Baisher was still curious. However, now that he saw it, he completely understood. The number of skeletons here was too shocking. It was much more terrifying than what they had seen before. At this moment, he also knew why some cultivators who had reached the Starlight Realm had yet to enter the upper realm. Based on the current situation, if one's battle prowess wasn't strong enough and was only at the level of Astral Radiant Stage 1, it wouldn't be easy for them to pass through this place. Qian Feilong and the others quickly caught up. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's ugly expression, they all smiled. Bailey Hongzhuang, you have no way out now. Why don't you just kill yourself and save us the trouble? Qian Feilong chuckled. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze was cold and merciless. If you want to kill me, you have to pay the price. Come to think of it, you guys didn't gain much of an advantage when you attacked Ying and the others. You had so many people before, but now you've lost half of your people. Your losses are even greater than ours. As Bailey Hongzhuang spoke, the expressions of the cultivators from the Crimson Moon sect instantly turned ugly. They could not help but recall the time when they were dealing with Zyron and the others. Indeed, none of these guys were easy to deal with. It clearly looked like a sure-win situation, but they still had to pay a heavy price. Now that he thought about it, he felt a wave of displeasure in his heart. Chapter 4157. Even though Mu Zhe and the others had covered it up very quickly, Bailey Hongzhuang had not overlooked this point and had keenly noticed it. Didn't they die by our hands in the end? Qian Feilong laughed icily. I admit that your friends have great potential. Unfortunately, they had offended us and could only lose their little lives in the end. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze slowly darkened, but her expression became even more determined. Since things have come to this, let's fight if you want. A raging desire to fight burned in her eyes. Now that there was no way to retreat, she would fight with all her might. Even though she could already foresee the final outcome, as long as she could make the other party pay a price, that would be good enough. The three spiritual beasts stayed by Bailey Hongzhuang's side. They would live and die with their master. Even if they were to all die here today, they would make sure that a few of the Crimson Moon Sect's members were left alive. Master, we will fight with you until the end. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's lips slowly curled into a smile. However, there was a sense of sadness in her smile. All right. In the next moment, the energy within Bailey Hongzhuang's body began to surge, and the aura of a level 2 Star Master was completely revealed. Faced with Bailey Hongzhuang's aura, Qian Feilong and the others were very calm. They had long known about Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation level. However, she was only at the level 2 Star Master. This was not a threat to them at all. Xiao He and Xiao Bai also enlarged their bodies and stood next to Bailey Hongzhuang. Their auras completely exploded. Purple Realm 9th level. Baisha was not slow either. Similarly, his Purple Realm 9th level aura exploded as well. When Qian Feilong and the others saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had 3 contracted spiritual beasts, they could not help but stare blankly for a moment. Their brains could not react in time. This situation was beyond their common sense, but they didn't dwell on it too much. Although they didn't know how Bailey Hongzhuang did it, it was enough to know that she would soon die in their hands. Bailey Hongzhuang, this little bit of strength is not enough. Mu Zhe slowly said, his voice full of ridicule. He could tell that Bailey Hongzhuang was planning to fight them to the death, but with this little bit of strength, she was no threat to them. Come to think of it, a dying person wanting to throw away some dignity at the last moment, but not having enough strength, this was also a very depressing matter. However, Bailey Hongzhuang did not care about what he said. A wave of blood qi quietly spread out, and the blood qi field instantly exploded. Following the release of the blood qi field, Qian Feilong and the rest were shocked to discover that Bailey Hongzhuang's aura had directly risen from level 2 to level 4. Everyone couldn't help but light up. Their eyes flashed with a thick sense of astonishment. If Bailey Hongzhuang's level 2 Star Master strength was not enough to affect them, but this level 4 Star Master strength was not simple. At least, they couldn't completely ignore it. How did her strength increase so much? Qian Feilong was a little dumbfounded. This was really beyond his expectations. Looks like the reason why Mo Yunjue and the rest were able to kill them is because of this. Mu Zhe lowered his voice and said slowly. Chapter 4158. It was only at this moment that Mu Zhe finally understood. No wonder Mo Yunjue and the rest were able to kill their teammates despite having so few people. It turned out that they had underestimated Mo Yunjue and the rest's abilities. Previously, when they were facing Skeleton, these fellows had actually been hiding their abilities. It was truly terrifying. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt his scalp tingle. It seemed that he should not have provoked such a group of trouble. Mo Yunjue and the rest had successfully left. They must have already reached Penglai Palace, and the people in Penglai Palace probably already knew about this matter. If Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen did not return, everyone would know that Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichun had died in their hands. Based on the friendship shown by Mo Yunjue and the rest, Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest had died in their hands. They would definitely not take this lying down. When the time came, they would definitely come looking for them for revenge. However, when facing such talented cultivators, they would inevitably encounter trouble in the future. Qian Feilong naturally also realized this point. His expression instantly became complicated. Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest looked young. They did not expect their battle abilities to be so shocking. It had truly exceeded their expectations. The battle abilities of young people nowadays are truly shocking. It seems that we have underestimated them previously. Muze nodded slightly. Since things have already come to this, we can only take care of one person at a time. It was naturally best if they did not offend them. However, the hatred between both parties was already so thick that it could not be resolved. Hence, they could only brace themselves and continue to kill one person at a time. Attack! Qian Feilong waved his hand and said. In the next moment, the group of cultivators directly charged forward. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze was firm and sharp. She held the flowing light sword in her hand and did not retreat as she charged forward. The three beasties' speed was not slow either. Even if they were not opponents, they had to use all their strength to injure the other party. Ding ding ding. Bailey Hongzhuang and Qian Feilong directly engaged in battle. Qian Feilong's strength was at the 5th level of the Star Radiance realm. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang had already raised her aura to the 4th level of the Star Radiance realm, there was still a gap between them. Therefore, Qian Feilong had absolute confidence in dealing with Bailey Hongzhuang. He believed that Bailey Hongzhuang was definitely not his match. Although Bailey Hongzhuang had forcibly raised her cultivation through other means, he believed that Bailey Hongzhuang would not be able to maintain it for too long. In the end, Bailey Hongzhuang was doomed. Qian Feilong turned into a streak of blue light and rushed towards Bailey Hongzhuang as fast as lightning. He punched out, sending out billowing waves of air. Thunder Fist. Facing Qian Feilong's eerie lightning fist, Bailey Hongzhuang's flowing light sword also violently stabbed out. A tyrannical sword aura directly shot out from the flowing light sword. Ding! The wind from the fist and the sword aura collided together and resisted each other. Unexpectedly, no one was able to break through the other's attack. Qian Feilong's gaze suddenly froze. His heart was in a perilous situation. He did not expect that Bailey Hongzhuang's current combat power could actually go head-to-head with him. In the next moment, Qian Feilong did not dare to be careless and directly drew out a long rod. This long rod was completely black in color. However, the two ends of the rod were red. There were engravings of tigers and leopards on it. It looked ferocious and powerful, extremely fierce. Don't! Chapter 41:59. Take this. The strong and ferocious strike carried a shocking force as it headed straight for Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang's figure flashed as she executed the shifting forms technique and dodged Qian Feilong's fatal strike. Bailey Hongzhuang, it's meaningless for you to rely on dodging. If you have the ability, fight me head-on. Qian Feilong sneered. The two of you are going against one of me, and you want me to fight you head-on? Qian Feilong, do you know how to write the word shame? Bailey Hongzhuang glanced sideways at the other cultivator who was glaring at her like a tiger watching its prey. Not only did she have to deal with Qian Feilong's attack, she also had to guard against this fellow who was ready to launch a sneak attack at any time. Naturally, she had to be extra careful. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Qian Feilong's expression was rather awkward. At this moment, Li Boyo finally managed to rush over. His energy center was crippled, and he was no different from an ordinary person. Naturally, he could not keep up with everyone's speed. Even though he had chased after them for a long time before finally catching up, his entire face was pale, and he was on the verge of collapsing. If it were not for the fact that he wanted to witness Bailey Hongzhuang's death with his own eyes, he would not have risked his life. Now, he had placed all his hatred for his energy center being crippled on Bailey Hongzhuang. He felt that Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest had clearly grasped the method to enter the black pool, but they had stood there and watched him make a fool of himself. As a result, he had ended up in such a state. Feilong, fight her head-on and let her know how powerful you are. Li Boyo spoke, then looked mockingly at Bailey Hongzhuang. I'll let you die in peace. Do you think that Feilong can't deal with you alone? Qian Feilong nodded. That's right. I'll fight you head-on now. I like to see how long you can last. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled and her dark eyes turned sharp and cold. All right, let's try. A proud smile appeared in Qian Feilong's eyes. This Bailey Hongzhuang was still too naive. If Bailey Hongzhuang continued to hide, he would have to spend a lot of effort to deal with her. After all, her movement technique was better than his. Now that Bailey Hongzhuang had agreed to stop hiding, she was definitely no match for him. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had the same idea at the moment. She didn't expect to be able to take care of everyone. As long as she could take care of one person, that would be good enough. If the two of them had besieged her, it would have been really inconvenient for her to make a move. However, since Qian Feilong had jumped into this pit himself, her success rate had greatly increased. Just as Qian Feilong was about to attack Bailey Hongzhuang, he discovered that Bailey Hongzhuang's aura suddenly changed. A cold and bloodthirsty, murderous intent exploded with her as the epicenter. The surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped under this murderous intent, causing his hairs to stand on end. When he raised his eyes again, he was shocked to find that Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes had turned blood red. Looking into her eyes, he saw a terrifying mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The thick and viscous blood caused his body to turn cold. Qian Feilong's eyes instantly widened. He couldn't imagine how the young Bailey Hongzhuang could experience such a terrifying scene. Immediately after that, he felt his movements become sluggish. His entire being was immersed in that kind of emotion. Even Bailey Hongzhuang in front of him seemed to have become invincible. Chapter 4160. While Qian Feilong was in a daze, Bailey Hongzhuang's figure suddenly swept across. The sharp sword pierced towards Qian Feilong without hesitation. Although Qian Feilong was immersed in shock, he still reacted at the critical moment. His figure immediately flashed and avoided the vital points, but his body was still injured by Bailey Hongzhuang. The flowing light sword directly pierced a bloody hole in the opponent's body, and fresh blood kept flowing out. The pain stimulated Qian Feilong, and only then did Qian Feilong react. His face instantly turned ugly. He had previously threatened to teach Bailey Hongzhuang a lesson, but he didn't expect to be seriously injured by her in the blink of an eye. It was really a slap in the face. Li Boyo couldn't help but be stunned. He really didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to be able to injure Qian Feilong. He couldn't help but ask, Feilong, what are you thinking? He didn't understand what was going on. Qian Feilong was actually standing there foolishly, waiting for Bailey Hongzhuang to attack. Qian Feilong glanced at Li Boyo with a complicated expression. For a moment, he didn't know how to explain. The scene just now was too strange, but it was obvious that he was the only one who saw it. Even if he explained, no one would believe him, so he could only swallow this loss. Seeing that Qian Feilong was silent, Li Boyo couldn't help but speak again. Feilong, quickly kill her. Hearing that, Qian Feilong nodded and immediately attacked Bailey Hongzhuang again. Gold and iron clashed. Qian Feilong obviously hated Bailey Hongzhuang to a certain extent, and his attacks became increasingly fierce. The three beasts were facing the enemy cultivator's siege, and the pressure was immense. At this moment, their biggest enemy was Mu Zhe. Other than Mu Zhe, they still had the strength to fight against the other cultivators. But Mu Zhe's cultivation was much stronger than theirs, so they were restrained in all aspects. Originally, Mu Zhe and the others also released their own contract beasts, but when they released their contract beasts, they found that in the face of Bailey Hongzhuang's 3 contract beasts, Their contract beast did not dare to move half a step. Under such circumstances, everyone realized how amazing these 3 contracted beasts were. There was an absolute level restriction between demonic beasts. Therefore, as long as they encountered a demonic beast whose level was far higher than theirs, the lower-level demonic beasts would not have the slightest intention of resisting. Under such circumstances, the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect had no choice but to deal with the 3 mystical beasts themselves. Bailey Hongzhuang directly released her killing aura. Immediately after, Qin Feilong and the others immediately felt as if they were immersed in a wave of pressure. Their auras were directly suppressed. Noticing this, the cultivators present could not help but be stunned. The shock in their eyes when they looked at Bailey Hongzhuang became even more intense. What powerful battle power! Mu Zhe stared at Bailey Hongzhuang in astonishment. He had thought that dealing with Bailey Hongzhuang would be an easy task. He never thought that she would be able to force them into such a situation. How shocking! Qin Feilong could not help but feel jealous. Bailey Hongzhuang was so young, yet she had so many tricks up her sleeves. It was simply too enviable. It seems that we can't underestimate Bailey Hongzhuang. It's a good thing that Di Beichun is still in the ruins. Otherwise, if the 2 of them were to join forces, they might cause quite a bit of trouble for us. Chapter 4161. At this moment, Li Buoyo understood that he could not allow Bailey Hongzhuang to continue on like this. Otherwise, if Bailey Hongzhuang were to have the opportunity to break out of their encirclement, that would be terrible. Feilong, don't mind what you've said previously. You and Mu Zhe can attack Bailey Hongzhuang together. Hearing Li Buoyo's words, Qin Feilong and Mu Zhe could not help but frown. Even though they wanted to kill Bailey Hongzhuang, going back on their words in front of a woman was a little embarrassing. Bailey Hongzhuang laughed icily. Li Buoyo, to think that you used to be the big senior brother of the Crimson Moon sect. Your way of doing things is much worse than the Penglai Palace. From what I can see, you're only pretending to be a gentleman on the surface. In reality, you're a despicable villain. If this had been the past, Li Buoyo might have been angered by Bailey Hongzhuang's words. However, now that he has become a cripple, he naturally did not care about such remarks. As long as he could achieve everything he wanted, nothing else mattered. Bailey Hongzhuang, there's no need for you to provoke me. So what if I'm a despicable villain? Those teammates of yours who claimed to be gentlemen had all died under my schemes. Soon you'll die too. No matter how good your performance is, you'll only lose your life in the end. If you have the ability, you should avenge your dead comrades. Li Buoyo smiled complacently. In this round, Bailey Hongzhuang had lost in the end. She had lost miserably. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes suddenly sharpened. Whenever she thought of Shangguan Yingying, Wen Ziren, and Mo Yunjue and the other smiling faces, her eyes became bloodshot. They had all come to Penglai Island for her and Beichun's sake. However, they had all lost their lives because of them. And the instigator of all of this was Li Buoyo. Li Buoyo. Bailey Hongzhuang gritted her teeth. Even if I die here today, I will kill you. Get a try then. Li Buoyo shrugged. He was not afraid of Bailey Hongzhuang's words at all. It was impossible for Bao Li Hongzhuang, who was currently surrounded, to kill him. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang attacked Qin Feilong directly, and Qin Feilong quickly responded. However, he was already injured by Bailey Hongzhuang's previous attack, so he couldn't deal with Bailey Hongzhuang the same as before. Mu Zhe was a little hesitant, but after seeing Qin Feilong fall into a disadvantageous position under Bailey Hongzhuang's attacks, he could only rush over to help. They had already suffered too many losses here. They could not afford to have any more casualties. Xiao He, Xiao Bai, and White Lion were already injured. Although they were very fast, their opponents were stronger than them. Naturally, they were injured. White Lion's fur had already been dyed red with blood. A thick murderous intent flickered in his eyes. These fellows before him were extremely abominable. Unfortunately, he could not share his master's burden. If only his cultivation could be a little more powerful. Previously, he had already touched the barrier to the starlight state, but had not been able to break through in the end. As Xiao He and Xiao Bai could change their forms at any time, their injuries were slightly lighter. After all, they had the upper hand. However, after the Crimson Moon Sect's cultivators had understood this characteristic of theirs, the effects of their attack had greatly weakened. The wounds on their bodies gradually increased, and their attacks were no longer as fierce as before. Chapter 4162. Hence, no matter how serious the injuries on their bodies were, they did not have any intention of retreating. They wanted to persevere and fight till the end with their master. Even if they were to die, they wanted to die with a bang and fight till the very last of their strength. Bailey Hongzhuang naturally noticed Mu Zhe's actions, and her heart sank. Once Mu Zhe joined the battle, then she would be trapped. Thinking of this, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness as she took on Mu Zhe's palm. Mu Zhe saw that Bailey Hongzhuang did not dodge his attack, and a trace of astonishment surfaced in his eyes. Although the angle of his attack was a little tricky, Bailey Hongzhuang could still dodge it. But Bailey Hongzhuang did not even dodge. Could it be that she knew that she was going to die, so she did not even plan to dodge? But in the next moment, Mu Zhe understood the reason why Bailey Hongzhuang did this. Because after Bailey Hongzhuang took on his attack, she immediately charged towards Li Boyo. Li Boyo did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang to attack him without any regard for the consequences, and a thick fear surfaced on his face as he shouted, "Quick! Stop her quickly!" Qian Feilong immediately took action, but Bailey Hongzhuang was good at speed, and even if he chased after her, he was still unable to stop her. Li Boyo saw the situation and quickly ran backwards. But how could he, who had turned into a normal person, be Bailey Hongzhuang's opponent? Bailey Hongzhuang's attack landed mercilessly on Li Boyo's back. Bang! Li Boyo's figure fell onto the ground with a loud crash as he started to spit out large mouthfuls of blood. How could a normal cultivator withstand a merciless attack from a Star Radiance Rel practitioner? Instantly, Li Boyo breathed out more than he breathed in. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were red and vicious. Li Boyo, didn't you say that you were arrogant? Even if I die, you will die first. Master, good job. When the three beasts saw Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, they all spoke out. This Li Boyo was the instigator, and if they did not kill him, they would not be able to rest in peace. Li Boyo stared blankly at Bailey Hongzhuang. Even if he had become a cripple, he still did not want to die. But he did not expect that Bailey Hongzhuang, who was bound to die, would be able to divert her attention to kill him. His eyes were wide open, and his face was filled with unwillingness. But he had no choice but to fall to the ground. Mu Zhe rushed to the back of Bailey Hongzhuang's attack. He had already made up his mind. He must kill Bailey Hongzhuang, otherwise there would be no end of trouble. Bailey Hongzhuang's palm collided with his, but a trace of blood quietly spilled from her lips. Mu Zhe's previous attack was also very powerful. She had also suffered serious internal injuries after forcefully withstanding that palm strike. But to be able to kill Li Boyo, the instigator, she felt that it was worth it. When Mu Zhe saw that Bailey Hongzhuang was injured, he immediately grabbed hold of this opportunity. His ferocious attacks landed on Bailey Hongzhuang's body like raindrops. Bailey Hongzhuang tried her best to deal with the attacks, but was still hit occasionally. Qian Feilong had also rushed over. Bailey Hongzhuang had seriously injured him, and this made him feel that he had lost face. He must take revenge now. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were red from the killing, and the energy in her body was gradually dissipating. In order to support the killing aura and blood aura field, her energy consumption was extremely shocking. Chapter 4163. Deek Beichun, who was in the middle of accepting the inheritance, suddenly felt ill at ease. He felt as if he was about to lose the most important thing in his life. His heart ached, and even his breathing became difficult. Hongzhuang, A solemn light flashed across his pitch-black eyes. To him, the most important thing was Bailey Hongzhuang. Aside from that, there was no other possibility. Something must have happened to Hongzhuang. Di Beichen's expression turned ugly. Previously, he had directly entered the world created by the owner of the ruins. He had no idea what was going on outside. He only knew that Li Boyo and the others clearly hated his teammates. However, he thought that Wan Yinling and the others were nearby, so logically speaking, there shouldn't be any problems. However, the feeling that he had now was clearly warning him that Hongzhuang was in danger. At the thought of this, he desperately wanted to finish accepting the inheritance so that he could help Hongzhuang. No, I must get out of here as soon as possible. Di Beichen's eyes were resolute and persistent. Hongzhuang was the person he treasured the most. If anything happened to Hongzhuang, he would not be able to bear the consequences. Xiaohei let out a blood-curdling scream. A bloody hole had been pierced through its body by the other party. At this moment, blood had dyed its white fur red. When Xiao Bai and Bai Shi saw this, they only wanted to help Xiaohei. Unfortunately, their situation was not much better than Xiaohei's. The difference in numbers between the two parties was simply too great. Even though the owner had done his best, there was still a gap. Noticing Xiaohei's blood-curdling screams, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but turn away. Her blood-red eyes were moist. All these years, the three beasts had always been by her side. She simply could not accept that the three beasts had died because of her. However, there was nothing she could do about the current situation. Taking advantage of Bailey Hongzhuang's distraction, Qian Feilong's attack landed on Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Bailey Hongzhuang staggered back 2 steps. Her breathing gradually weakened, and her movements became sluggish. She felt very tired. Noticing her change, Qian Feilong felt that he had found an opportunity. As long as he took advantage of this opportunity, he would be able to kill Bailey Hongzhuang. In the next moment, Qian Feilong seized Bailey Hongzhuang's weakness and attacked her directly. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed, but her lips hooked up in a strange smile. "Let's die together." As soon as he finished speaking, the explosives appeared in Bailey Hongzhuang's hands. Then, an earth-shattering explosion sounded. Bang! Boom, boom, boom. A huge explosion resounded, and the whole world seemed to shake because of this deafening sound. A huge crater appeared, flattening the place where Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were standing. After Di Beichun had left the ruins, he realized that there was no one around. Just as he was thinking about where to look for Bailey Hongzhuang, he suddenly heard a deafening sound. He could not help but turn around and look behind him. He knew that this was the sound of Bailey Hongzhuang's explosives. Unless there was no other choice, Bailey Hongzhuang would never use explosives. His premonition had not been wrong. Hongzhuang was really in danger. Chapter 4164. Till his death, Qian Feilong had never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would actually use such a big move at the very end. Ever since he had suffered a loss at the hands of Chu Jinfeng, he had always been on guard against Bailey Hongzhuang using such a move. Even Mu Zhe and the rest had always been on guard against this. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had never used this move, so he gradually let down his guard. Only, he never thought that at the very last moment, Bailey Hongzhuang would actually use explosives. Not only that, this explosive was much more powerful than the one that Chu Jinfeng had used previously. By the time Qian Feilong realized all this, it was already too late. He only felt a sharp pain, and his entire body was torn into pieces by the power of the explosive. When Di Beichun arrived, all he saw was a mess. The huge, deep pit was surrounded by a faint smell of blood. At a glance, he could even see broken limbs and broken bones. It was a miserable sight. However, Di Beichun did not have the mood to pay attention to all this. He was only looking for Bailey Hongzhuang's figure. The only thing he wanted to confirm was that Bailey Hongzhuang was fine. As long as Bailey Hongzhuang was fine, then he could be at ease. Otherwise, that kind of situation was something that he did not dare to imagine. However, Bewitching looked around and did not see Bailey Hongzhuang's figure at all. His face instantly turned extremely ugly. Muse's arm had been directly blown off. He stared blankly at this scene, his eyes filled with an inconceivable light. Even though he felt that Bailey Hongzhuang was not a simple person, but this counterattack made him stunned. His body was burning with pain, but he felt as if he had fallen into a dream. He did not dare to believe that all of this was actually real. Such a huge disparity, and yet they had still paid such a huge price. How? How is this possible? Muse was puzzled. He had experienced so many big and small battles, but only this battle left the deepest impression on him. If his reaction had been just a little slower, he would have lost his life. Indescribable regret spread in his heart. If he had known that this would be the result, even if Li Boyo thought that he was heartless, he would not have wanted to pay such a price. Bailey Hongzhuang's figure inexplicably became incomparably tall in his mind, and an indescribable fear arose in his heart. He was no match for Bailey Hongzhuang. He, who was at the 5th stage of the Starlight Realm, was actually not a match for Bailey Hongzhuang, who was at the 2nd stage of the Starlight Realm. He understood that this was an inner demon. Cultivators were most afraid of encountering inner demons. Once they were unable to overcome it, they would be unable to advance their cultivation for the rest of their lives. However, based on the current situation, he didn't have the confidence to overcome this inner demon. Muse was not the only one who was stunned. The remaining 3 cultivators from Crimson Moon Sect could not help but stare blankly at this scene. In the blink of an eye, only the 4 of them were left in their team. When they first came to the ruins, there were more than 20 people, but now there were only 4 of them left, and they were either injured or disabled. How were they going to return under such circumstances? How were they going to explain this to the cultivators from Crimson Moon Sect? Even though they'd survived the battle, they knew very well that they'd lost the battle, and they'd lost completely. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.